Woo, ladies and gentlemen, it's ready for the bang, bang, shoot 'em up. It's time to talk World War I. Let's get started. Okay, for the first several minutes of this video, I'm just going to give you some background because we really need to understand what the United States is getting ready to jump into. And we're going to start here in Europe, and not only are we just going to start in Europe, but we're going to start in what they call the powder keg of Europe, which are the Balkans. And very specifically, we're going to Serbia. Now we have to understand the reason why we need to talk about Serbia is to understand the craziness with which the United States is getting ready to jump into. So now for the almost a century before World War I, Serbia has been divided really between two dynasties, and the dynasties would swing back and forth. One dynasty would take over, there would be an assassination attempt. The other dynasty would take over the assassination attempt, and this would go back and forth for quite some time, and of course goes all the way up until the time of right before World War I. The last Karađorđević emperor is going to be a guy by the name of King Alexander I, and he's going to have a wife by the name of Queen Draga, and they are going to ruffle feathers. So, for instance, Alexander I is going to ignore the Serbian constitution, suspend some rights, and having Queen Draga as his queen becomes this really important dividing piece. As a matter of fact, she had a pretty bad reputation for promiscuity. As a matter of fact, one of his senior interior minister said this at a dinner party. Said, "Sir, you cannot marry her. She has been everybody's mistress, including mine." And I think he gets smacked for that. I really do. I think he gets smacked for that. But so he doesn't have a lot of support within the dynasty for his wife and for his descendants, and they're not going to have any children. And so he decides that the next king is going to be her brother, and people begin freaking out. And what happens is within the army, within the Serbian army, this small group of soldiers is going to commit regicide, which is to kill a king. And as a matter of fact, they consider themselves and they refer to themselves as the regicides. And so there's this conspiracy within the military works together to find an opportunity to take out the king. Now, this is nothing new in Serbia during this time. And so they do plot this. And so when King Alexander I is in his castle, the regicides go in, and as you guys can imagine, we know what happens next. So in their bedroom, they're both going to be shot down, and a new king is going to come into power, and the Brenović dynasty is here to stay. Now, this king, anybody who's taking the throne is going to understand all the risks that is going to come with being a king of Serbia. So he immediately gives up a lot of his power to the Serbian parliament. Now, here's the problem, for you guys to understand why Serbia is so volatile, is that a lot of the people, the regicides that were a part of the killing of the last, all the people who were a part of the conspiracy to kill the last king, are all going to begin holding high offices in the military and the government. So those same people that were going to committed regicide are now in high offices. Here is Christopher Clark in his great book, The Sleepwalkers. Here's what he says. The conspiratorial network that had come together to murder the royal family did not simply melt away, but remained an important force in Serbian politics and public life. The fact that new regime depended on its existence on the blamework of conspirators, combined with fear of what the network might still be capable of, made open criticism difficult. So these regicides are going to be very powerful, and these groups are going to have more control into society that makes it unstable. Now, it further becomes interesting is there is this growing wave in Europe of nationalism, ethnic nationalism, where groups of people want different ethnicities, they want to live with each other and want to take steps to make sure that that happens. And Serbia is no different. But what happens within this military and within the civilians, the groups of people, both who are regicides and also civilians who are supporting they all begin to form this group that is going to be called Union or Death, or the Black Hand. And what this is going to be is a super secret society of people who are going to work together to push for a greater Serbia, and to create a Serbia and to expand Serbia's borders to include all Serbians that live all over in the Balkans area in that southern Europe. Here's Christopher Clark again. The Black Hand movement thrived on the cult of secrecy. Members were inducted by the means of ceremony similar to that of a Freemason. New recruits swore an oath before a hooded figure in a dark room, pledging absolute obedience to the organization of pain of death. And I actually have a written out oath of the Black Hand here, and it basically is what you would think it is. This, to be a part of the Black Hand, you're going to make an oath that every action that you take is going to be secret, and if you ever violate that, as a matter of fact, it'll let you burn in hell, and that you can be killed if you ever violated this oath of secrecy. And what's interesting is we start seeing these Black Hand what Christopher Clark called terrorist camps begin popping up all over Serbia. Christopher Clark again. Among their activities was the maintenance of a terrorist training camps at which recruits were instructed in marksmanship, bomb throwing, bridge building, and espionage. So all over Serbia is this rise, or these camps that are training them to commit espionage and to terrorist acts. Their leader, a guy by the name of Apis, who is almost the top of the military organization, becomes this leader. Here's what he says when you look at the actual the emblem of the Black Hand, where it's a skull and the crossbone, and someone came up to him and asked about this the skull and crossbone emblem, and he says this: poison was used as all guerrillas carried it, both as a means of attack and to save someone if he fell into the enemy hands. It is why such emblems enter the organization's seal, and it is a sign that these people were prepared to die. We have a serious problem in Serbia. And so to kind of go further on what I was talking about, this idea of these Serbian nationalists, which are starting to pop up all over Serbia, are arguing for a greater Serbia. And what that means, there's this idea of where a Serb dwells, that is Serbia. And here in these Balkans, there are ethnic Serbians in other countries around Serbia, and of course these nationalists, they actually want to go to war with some of these countries in order to make sure they bring in all Serbs into Serbia. And you can imagine that this area is a hot mess, but they're also kind of under the political and economic control of the larger country around it, which is the Austria-Hungary Empire. And the heir to the throne, which is going to be important for this story, this guy by the name of Franz Duke. I almost said Franch Duke, like that's like some sort of salad dressing or something. The heir to the throne of Austria is going to be a guy by the name of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And Archduke Franz Ferdinand was very much disliked by these Serbian nationalists. As a matter of fact, his future assassin, Gavrilo Princip, says, as future king, he would have prevented our union by carrying through certain reforms. Well, let's talk about what reforms he's going to carry through. Now, we have to understand Austria-Hungary was a a large collection of different nationalities. Now, Austria was its main, so Vienna, Austria was its main place where the emperor would stay. That's the Emperor Franz Joseph. But Hungary, and of course his heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, but both Austria and Hungary had independent legislatures, and when they made decisions, they basically had to come to an agreement. Now, to go further than that, there are dozens of different nationalities, as you see here, of people living within Austria-Hungary, from Germans to Italians to Serbs to Romanians, Ukrainians, you guess it, they're there. And these different nationalities are creating conflict within the Austria-Hungary Empire. Now, Franz Ferdinand had an idea about this. He wanted, because he knew there's a lot of tensions within Hungary and all the different nationalities, he wanted to create an empire of independent states within the Balkans, something similar to the United States, which makes sense. But it doesn't make sense to a Serbian nationalist. It doesn't make sense to someone who wants to expand Serbia to include all of the Serbians in all other countries. And so that is why when he would take over, of course, it probably would be able to pass this United States type of reform. People like Gavrilo Princip are not going to go through with this. Now, there's another important piece here that is going to play into what's going to happen later. Is Archduke Franz Ferdinand is he's suppressing a pro-war movement that is developing in Austria against Serbia, because there's a variety of border conflicts between Austria and Serbia, and the tension between the two is very palpable. As a matter of fact, his chief of staff, Conrad, is always talking about, let's go to war, and it's Archduke Franz Ferdinand that is preventing that war from happening. Now, for those who know, that's going to be a problem, because he's not going to live long. Okay, so you understand what's happening in Serbia, you understand what's happening around Austria-Hungary, and that there's a lot of tensions that are developing. And so this area, with Serbia included, it's called the Balkans, and it was called the powder keg of Europe for the same reasons why I was talking what I was talking about. There's this rise of this nationality, or this nationalism. That Serbia truly is. It's a force to be reckoned with, but to people in Europe, it seems like Serbia is not stable, and you can see these political cartoons that is kind of showing the different European powers are trying to make sure that the Balkans remain in check. Now, another important piece of these kind of long steps to war is going to be Germany. Now, Germany just has recently become a state. Not state, it's become a country from many different Germanic states unifying. And what's been happening in Germany has been getting the attention of the other European countries, Russia and France and Britain. And Germany, and the reason why they're doing this is Germany has by far the strongest land army of all of the European countries. And to go even further, let's go back to Christopher Clark in his book, The Sleepwalkers. By 1913, Germany was behind the United States but ahead of Britain. In other words, during the years 1860 to 1913, the German share of world industrial production increased fourfold, while the British sank by a third. Even more impressive was Germany's expanded share of world trade. So Germany, not only are they an impressive world power militarily, they're becoming a world power financially, and it seems like the balance of power in Europe is beginning to fall. Britain, France, and Russia all have their eyes on Germany, even though Germany's not really a cause. It's not immediately clear that Germany is going to be a major cause of this war, but their suspicion is going to create another very important piece here, and that is the creation of these military alliances. Britain, France, and Russia are going to combine into a military alliance called the Triple Entente, and that basically leaves Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy to combine with an alliance an alliance called the Triple Alliance. Now, here's the thing. With these military alliances, when one gets into a conflict, that means the other ones will come in. Now, notice Germany, as you can tell, is surrounded. And so Germany, and we're going to talk about, once the war kicks off, we're going to talk about Germany has a plan for this. And then we'll see how it actually works out. But one final and very, very important piece here. Serbia also has an agreement with Russia, and they're connected with Russia. So if Serbia gets in conflict with Austria-Hungary, and that could possibly bring Russia in, and then of course bring Germany in, you can see how this thing would fall apart fast. So going back to Austria-Hungary and Serbia, of course, during all this in 1914, in June of 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand is going to go on tour. He's going to go to Sarajevo, and there he's going to be shot by the aforementioned Gavrilo Princip. Gavrilo Princip is going to shoot both Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie. And of course, he is going to be captured. He does take his pill. They carried around poison pills, and those are expired. It doesn't do anything but get him sick. And when Franz Ferdinand dies, of course, the tension between Serbia and Austria-Hungary begin to reach a point of no return. Austria-Hungary is going to issue an ultimatum in which, in essence, I won't go into the details, but they require certain things of Serbia to investigate the shooting, investigate these members of the Black Hand, and Serbia complies with almost everything except for one thing, and it very much was intentional. Austria-Hungary is going to declare war on Serbia, and things begin to fall apart. Let's go back to what Germany was, the issues Germany was having. Germany, as I said, is going to be surrounded on both sides. And their plan for that was something called the Schlieffen Plan. And the Schlieffen Plan was fairly simple. Germany understood that they had a great land army. They had the strongest military in the world. Germany, in the Schlieffen Plan, Germany would attack through Belgium and the Netherlands, and they would sack France really quick, and then they would swing back around, and by the time Russia finishes mobilizing and gets all the troops to the field, they're going to be able to swing back and attack full force on Russia, defeating Russia, and of course winning the war. So when the war does break out, let's see what it looks like. Germany does go through the Netherlands and Belgium, but things end a little bit different than they expected. Belgium puts up a large fight, and Belgium is beginning to fight with a weapon that's not brand new, but it becomes perfected during World War I, and it's going to have devastating losses because military tactics are not going to adjust to it just yet. And that, of course, is going to be the machine gun. To show you the real cost and what it meant to have a machine gun on the battlefield, Barbara Tuchman in her book, The Guns of August, says it clear. And this is an attack on a Belgian fort by the Germans, and you can hear her basically talking about how the impact of the machine gun. Here's what she says. On August 5th, the brigades opened the attack on the four easternmost forts of Liège with cannonade by field artillery, followed by infantry assault. Light shells made no impression on the forts, and the Belgian guns poured a hail of fire on the German troops, slaughtering their front ranks. Company after company came on, making for the spaces between the forts where the Belgian entrenchments had not yet completed. At some points they were broken through. The Germans stormed the slopes where the guns could not be depressed. to reach them, they were mowed down by the fort's machine guns, the dead piled on the ridges a yard high. At the fort, Belgians, seeing the Germans' line waver, charged with bayonet to throw them back. Again and again, the Germans returned to the assault, spending lives like bullets in the knowledge of plentiful reserves to make up for the losses. They came on line after line, almost shoulder to shoulder, until we shot them down. The fallen were heaped on top of each other in an awful barricade of dead and wounded that threatened to mask our guns and cause us trouble. They got no farther than halfway because of our machine guns and rifles swept them back. Of course, we had our losses, but they were slight compared to the carnage we inflicted on our enemies. The machine gun and these new weapons of war are changing everything. Germany makes it through Belgium, but the Belgians slowed them down enough. So to of course have the French mobilize, and the Belgians slowed them down enough to have the Russians mobilize on their eastern front. And as you can see, Germany is fighting a two-front war, a war that's almost impossible. The Schlieffen Plan breaks down. Every idea what they thought was going to happen doesn't happen, and now they're fighting a two-front war, a war of attrition. One of the things that's going to define the Western Front of World War I is going to be trench warfare. And of course, trenches are going to be, massive ditches that are going to be hundreds of miles long as these two huge armies are going to meet each other in the field of battle. So let's zoom in a little bit and let's look at this is a real picture. Of course, the animations are not, but the real picture of a trench, an aerial view of the trenches. And you can see kind of how massive these trenches would be. You can see the little pock marks all over as there's constant cannon fire in these trenches. The gap between you can see the gap between the two trenches is an area called No Man's Land, which of course got its name because we have this area is going to be hit with lots of cannons, going to be hit with lots of machine guns, and this is going to change war forever. These trenches are created because our tactics did not catch up with the firepower. And we can look inside. You can look inside and see how deep that these trenches are. If we look into a small, one line of the trench, you can see how deep these trenches are and how far back they go. So there we are. This is the disaster of Europe. This is the disaster of Europe that, of course, the United States does not want to get into already. So let's go on back and let's go back to see what's happening in the United States. So in the United States, everybody in the world is talking about, of course, what's happening in Europe. This is called the Great War. The United States, just like we did back with Washington, they're going to issue neutrality because they're watching the European war deaths start increasing millions and millions at a time. Woodrow Wilson basically says no thanks. But here's the thing. We do continue to aid both sides. We continue to send merchant ships that will supply most of the people in the war. And this is a problem, right? Because the problem is something else that happens in the war that I haven't explained yet. When the war breaks out, when Britain comes in, Britain's going to blockade Germany. And so they're going to blockade Germany, so now the United States isn't trading with Germany anymore, and now Germany is blocked off from their sea. They're fighting a true front war. The United States is funding both Russia and France and England, and basically the Triple Entente is getting United States funds and getting United States weaponry. Germany is fighting this war of attrition. So what's the problem? This two-front war and this blockade is preventing trade. They are on a timer. So Germany comes up with a brilliant move using a new machine of war called the U-boat, or the undersea boat, which is now called the submarine. And these U-boats are going to be used not only to break the blockade, but to stop the merchant ships, the United States merchant ships. So again, as the United States is funding the war and funding all sides of the war, Germany is going to launch its U-boats, and as a matter of fact, it launches in 1915. Unrestricted submarine warfare, which means it doesn't matter what flag you're flying. If a U-boat, if you're a merchant ship and you're going into war waters, a U-boat can shoot them down, and they do. And that is what, and so the Germans send U-boats all into the Atlantic. Now, again, there's no one really still going, clamoring for war in a large amount until later in 1915 with the sinking of the Lusitania. Now, the funny thing is, the Lusitania knew that there was a war zone that they were going in. As a matter of fact, Germany, trying to prevent the United States from coming in, sends a notice to the head of the Lusitania, sends a notice to the travelers, sends it to Washington, D.C. for it to be published in the newspaper to say, listen, you're going into a war zone and you can be sunk if you go into this war zone. They go anyway. And the main reason why they go anyway is the Lusitania was supposed to be the fastest ship. They thought that they could outrun any ship that might attack it. But it just so happened it crossed paths perfectly at the same time as a U-boat with just one torpedo left. And the U-boat captain sends this one torpedo with the thought that it would do nothing, but they just did this random shot out of the blue. And the thing is it hit the side, and the U-boat captain talked about this massive explosion that happened that he didn't expect, and the Lusitania sank instantaneously. And it turns out the Lusitania was carrying armaments to, along with passengers, to go to England. And so this Lusitania sinking begins this slow march to the war. People begin, we have two groups that begin competing with each other. One wants to go to war, one doesn't. Lusitania is beginning to rattle that jar. But the thing is, Wilson right now is not doing it. 1915, Wilson's having none of it. As a matter of fact, he gets praise for it. You guys remember William Lloyd Garrison? His grandson comes out and says, every American should give thanks with full heart that Woodrow Wilson is in the White House at this time. By 1916, the merchant ships have been sunk several times over the past year. As a matter of fact, one is going to get sunk, but the Sussex is also going to be sunk, and this is going to really cause a problem, and which the United States has to threaten. So Germany doesn't want the United States to come in. They are going to sign something called the Sussex Pledge of 1916, where they promise to stop unrestricted submarine warfare. And it seems like we're evading the possibility of getting into war. But back in the United States, things begin happening that again are going to move us toward kind of conflict and maybe getting in the side against the Triple Alliance. There's this growing anti-German sentiment that's beginning to happen in the United States. In late 1916, there are some indications that German agents are sabotaging and fomenting labor troubles in the East Coast ports and factories, and this is going to grow this anti-German sentiment. As a matter of fact, Woodrow Wilson kind of launches an attack against what is going to be called hyphenated Americans, which means German Americans. Here's what he said. There are citizens of the United States, I blush to admit, born under other flags, Germany, but welcomed under our generous naturalization laws to the full freedom and opportunity of America, who have poured the poison of disloyalty in the very arteries of our national life. Such creatures of passion, disloyalty, and anarchy must be crushed out. And so our anti-German sentiment is beginning to increase. But the thing is, at this time, 1916, 1 in 3 citizens had a foreign-born parent. So, so there's a significant number of people who are immigrants or who are children of immigrants. As a matter of fact, 10 million people are going to come from the Central Powers, the people of the Central Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. We have 10 million people who would represent people from that alliance. So it's really unclear which side we're going to join. But ladies and gentlemen, we have an election. And Woodrow Wilson is going to win election pretty handedly. Of course, we know the Republicans are a disaster right now because there's been a split and with Roosevelt and everything. But Wilson, one of Wilson's key pieces is he is going to get reelected with the slogan. This is great. He has kept us out of the war. So he's got people who are out there campaigning saying, "Vote for Wilson. He's kept us out of the war." I wonder what'll happen next. So by the spring of 1917, there were wide mutinies and riots happening in Russia. And there's something that's beginning to happen also within England and France. And by this time, England and France are running out of money, and they begin borrowing money from the United States. As a matter of fact, if they didn't borrow money from the United States, England and France were in open discussion of stopping the war because they are running out of money. And so the United States becomes the world's largest creditor nation, which means they're sending money to France and Britain and with these IOUs, and they're going to pay them back over the course of several years. And so the shift of the financial capital of the world is now going to shift from London to New York City, because World War I is such a drain on the Triple Entente, on places like Britain. But also, what's funny is by the late 1970s, the communist revolution is going to begin. Now, listen, one of the things that we find out about Russia is that when they perform poorly in these wars, they are likely to go into revolutions of all certain types. But this time in 1917, you guys remember those new ideas that are coming out of Europe? This time, the communist revolution takes hold in Russia. Now, there is one person who has been kind of this Marxist leader, and he has been kind of kicked out of Russia. I think he was in Sweden, or Switzerland. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Germany goes and finds this guy. He's a guy by the name of Vladimir Lenin, who's going to be the future communist leader of Russia. They find him. He's in exile out of Russia. They find him and they put him on a train and send him directly to Russia. So they find him, this guy who Russia has kicked out of. Germany finds him, put him on the sealed train, sends him back to Russia, and he is going to lead the communist revolution as the communists are going to take over in Russia, and Russia is going to leave the war. And when Russia leaves the war, now Germany can focus on one front, and now they're going to resume their unrestricted submarine warfare in 1917, and they're going to, over a few months in 1917, they're going to sink 4 United States merchant ships. And the clamoring for war in the United States is going to an all-time high. But just to kick the United States while they're down, Germany, in this kind of desperate attempt, sends something called the Zimmermann Telegram to Mexico in March of 1917. Now, this telegram is a coded telegram. It's going to be intercepted by England and broken. But this Zimmermann Telegram is a telegram. This is the actual telegram that you see on the screen. It's going to go to Mexico, and here's what it says. The Zimmermann Telegram is telling the representatives in Mexico, if the United States enters the war, and if Mexico invades the United States from the south, Germany will make sure they get back the Mexican cession. Oh, it's game time. Wilson is going to declare war, and he leads the war because when he goes into the war, he has this mantra that we're going to go into war, but we're going to make the world safe for democracy. And here's what Wilson says in his message to Congress on April 12, 1917, quote, "The world must be made safe for democracy. Its peace must be planted upon the tested foundation of the political liberty. We have no selfish ends to serve. We desire no conquest, no domination. We seek no indemnities for ourselves, no material compensations for our sacrifices we shall freely make." And he goes in with with already a plan to end the war, and that's the 14 points. And these 14 points, which is basically a treaty to end the war that has 14 individual points. We won't go through all of them. But in these 14 points, he has two big ones, big ones. One of which is going to be this idea of self-determination. Each country and each people can determine their own country, to determine their own leaders. But the second and most important, because he wants to make the world safe for democracy, the 14 points leaves a provision for the League of Nations, a larger governing body to help prevent wars from happening again. Here's David Kennedy in his book Over Here, The First World War in American Society, quote, "It was a fearful thing indeed. Wilson had asked Congress to commit the United States to a distant war that had already butchered men by the millions, shredded social and economic fabric of the old world, and shaken the very foundations of every belligerent government." And guys, but the thing is, it's not not everybody supports it, right? Actually, the first woman to be elected into Congress, Jeannette Rankin, is going to vote no. She's a pacifist. She says, "I want to stand by my country, but I vote no for war." And Congress, she's going to be the only no vote, though. Other pacifists in society are going to go out after the people who vote to go into war. As a matter of fact, one young pacifist goes up to Senator Henry Cabot Lodge and said, "Anyone who wants to go to war is a coward." And he looks at him like, "You're a damn coward." And then Henry Cabot Lodge says, "You're a damn liar," and then punches him. Oh gosh, I can't get enough. But please understand, there is a suspicion, right? Not everybody's clamoring for it. There's a suspicion. Senator George Norris says this: "By getting involved in the war would benefit only the class of people who will be made prosperous should we become entangled in the present war, who have already made millions of dollars, and who will make many hundreds of millions more if we get into the war. To whom does war bring prosperity? Not the soldier, not the broken-hearted widow, not the mother who weeps at the death of her brave boy. War brings no prosperity to the great masses of common patriotic citizens. We are going into war upon the command of gold. I feel that we are about to put the dollar sign on the American flag." Of course, by this time, the clamoring of war has reached a fever pitch, and now people are screaming at him and calling him treasonous, and then we go to war. Ladies and gentlemen, talk to you soon.